My love for detective or murder mystery stories started like many others. I watched something at way too young an age, and despite all the nightmares it gave me, I really rocked with them. In my case, the series that really got me going was Detective Conan, or, as I knew it for a while before I realized that series had different names depending on how they were translated, Case Closed. The adventures of Jimmy Kudo, his child form, Conan Edogawa, Rachel here, and just the whole cast of characters showed me that I had a deep love for finding a cold body and trying to figure out what the hell happened to it, while in the process learning about the person, the people that they loved or hated, or just the world around them, and the world at large, since the circumstances as to which people exist under have a lot to do with the reasons that they end up, putting a knife in someone's back. My love for detective and murder mysteries has persisted for a very long time and as well has survived the jump between mediums. Whereas I started with mostly books and TV shows, now I've really been paying attention to the genre in video games. Detective games just aren't fun because they put you in the driver's seat rather than having you ride along as a passenger. It's because of not only do they tell interesting and unique narrative tales, but they also give you the opportunity to engage with the unique deduction systems that developers create to have you solve their own mysteries. It's like always being in a new escape room and having to figure out whatever the logic of the person administrating it is. So, when I got a chance to see what games were coming to the Story-Rich Showcase that Fellow Traveler hosted earlier this June, I saw a healthy helping of detective games and decided to reach out to the developers making them and interview them. In this video, we're going to see 3 interviews. One is going to be with the developer behind Detective Turner and Folks Could Kill. The other one is going to be with the developers behind Shelflife Art School Detective. And the last one is going to be with the developer behind Duppy Detective Tashia. And while I've structured the introduction to this video under the assumption that you're watching it linearly, honestly, if you want to skip around a little bit, feel free to use the chapters to start at whatever interview you want. While all of them can be watched in isolation since the only context between all 3 of them is that they're all detective stories, I will say you should stick around and watch all 3 of them. Each developer has something unique to say about their development journey, about their game, about the themes being explored in their games, about murder mysteries in general, and a hell of a lot more that just comes up when you're talking to someone for 30 minutes. Or these are less than 30 minutes, but you get what I mean. So with that said, let's learn about some cases. The first of the 3 interviews was with Henrique Riker Lode, where we chat about their studio's debut title, Detective Turner If Looks Could Kill. Marketed as a mix between Knives Out and The Devil Wears Prada, you will quite literally be reading a room as you're photographing evidence, interrogating suspects, and doing whatever you really need to do to solve the murder of Margot Voss. In our chat, Riker and I discussed their game development journey, how a murder mystery game ended up being the debut title for their studio, the inspiration behind the very literal reading the room mechanic, and much more. So pop a squat, sip some water, and lock in for the interview. So, first off, thank you, Riker, for joining me today to talk about Detective Turner. I would love for you to talk about your journey into game development, because I know this isn't the first game that you've made, but this is the debut project for your studio, All Day, All Night, correct?
That is correct, yes. This is a long story. I've been making games for almost 15 years now, so I'm going to give you the quick rundown.
Okay.
I am originally from Germany, which you may hear in my accent, where I studied computer science. And then I went to Copenhagen to study game design. And from there, I started a company called Lohika, where I was making educational games. There is a very old game on Steam that I think I'm not going to mention because it's so old, If you find it, extra points. And I was working on a bunch of stuff there. And then I met my now spouse and decided that I'm going to take up and move to South Africa. And I was working at first, so I did some odd game design jobs here and there, and I was always lecturing at various universities. And now here I was working at the University of the Witwatersrand, teaching game design to a bunch of students. And then I discovered that it was actually in 2021, I was doing a bunch of prototypes because COVID, you had to get creative and do something more interesting with your life than teaching to a black screen. And I did a bunch of Twine prototypes and Unity prototypes and really rediscovered my programming skills and was really enjoying that. And then I decided to quit teaching and go full-time back into game development. Started working at Nyamakop, working as lead game designer on their title Reloaded.
Yes, I reviewed Reloaded earlier this year, actually. It was a great game.
Yeah. It's this African futurist heist game where you steal back African artifacts from Western museums, which is really cool. And yeah, after that, I just got a bit into prototyping stuff, and then from there, basically, when I stumbled across Detective Turner, Sugar, my husband was like, "This is your next game." So here we are.
Nice, amazing. And so, just before we get into Detective Turner, I'm curious, knowing now that you have this background in edutainment games as well as just teaching, does that have a lot of crossover, like transferable skills to making a detective game? Because whenever I think about detective games specifically, I always feel like there's a lot of teaching that has to be done to the player in a way that's not exactly tutorializing, but just teaching them what kind of thinking to adopt for a mystery game like this.
That is true for sure. But I feel like you can argue that all games actually got to be really good at teaching you something that you had no idea how to do while making you feel really good about it. I think that's kind of why I went into educational games because I hated education. And I was like, this doesn't have to suck. It doesn't have to be so hard. And I don't have to feel so stupid all the time. And I think games perfectly showcase you how you to keep you interested, motivated. And yeah, I think it wasn't a direct inspiration, I think, but I think it definitely shaped me as a designer to think about keeping things diegetic, keeping things connected, and it got to make sense. The things you got to do have to, yeah, all perfectly flow together. I don't have a perfect answer for this one.
No, no, I think that's perfectly fine. It's just
Okay.
interesting to hear just how that experience had, even if you said like it said all games have to have in some way good at teaching someone something they haven't done before, but it's undeniable that shaped the way that this came together specifically. So then let's also talk about Detective Turner. I'm curious about why you felt like it was a good time for this story, specifically why this is the one you wanted to do for the debut for your new studio. Is it that you're just a big fan of murder mysteries and detective stories, or was there something else that you're like, oh, this is the reason we have to show the world as our starter?
That's really interesting. I think I wasn't extremely selective about saying like this is the game because honestly, a murder mystery requires you to have a big cast of characters, and that is not a smart choice to do as the first game because it gets very expensive, especially because we're 3D modeling all the characters. So now I'm thinking about it could have been a little smaller type of narrative game. I think I just really like a challenge, and I liked creating this narrative thing. It's also as a narrative structure really complex to do because you have to think about how did the murder happen. You have to have your own murder board like a detective and be like, no, this person was here and then this happened, and but everybody looks suspicious. Everybody has a motive, so it's just like these multi-layered things of then, okay, now how is the player going to uncover this and how why they're going to think that all these different people could be suspects, and you want to lead them off on the wrong tangents just to bring them back, and then there's got to be a twist.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's just like narratively really interesting, challenging thing to try. And I don't know, I think I'm just following I think that after educational games I'm stumbling into narrative design and how I think that you just tug into all these different emotions. It's beyond just a little bit of fun or like, you did this great, you didn't do this well, sad, like just the basic emotions. You just get through all these layers of like trust and yeah, disbelief, leading people to connect with humans, but they're all multi-layered, right? Like sometimes you're like, no, this is a good person. It must be a good person. Only then the twist comes, of course.
Right.
Yeah. So I think it's fun for me to write. I think to also uncover what's gonna happen.
Right, and I think this is actually a good opportunity to dive a little bit into like narrative design because I feel like that's a term that a lot of people, especially if you're not like covering games like I am or just like some of my peers, the word narrative design is like you kind of have an idea of what that means, but for you in practice, what does it actually look like when you're designing a game like this?
Yeah, it definitely is story and characters first. You wanna lead this player on a journey, and usually games will start mechanics first and just be like, what is going to be fun to do, and you shape stuff around that. And for narrative games, I think really important concept is diegesis and trying to link the mechanics really closely, link making the player feel like they're part of that fantasy. And as a detective, I mean, like it's also kind of strange because my game is set in the modern world, so you could have all this technology, but of course, my detective has to be an analog person, so that you have your notebook and your Polaroid camera because it just like feels like such classic mechanics to use that feel so tactile and make you feel like somebody who's smart or like who connects the dots, and more and more information gets filled out. Partially, this is also because giving you a notebook is really my assist to say like, yes, you're following the murder along, but I'm writing down the notes of what everybody said, and I'm saying like, this is maybe something you should check deeper into or not, because I don't want players to have their own notebook and write things down. I want them to not come back like a couple of days later and be like, I have no idea who I thought was suspicious today. You know, I want to make it
Understandable.
approachable for a bigger audience.
No, I'm a gigantic fan of having notebooks in games. I just think not only, like you said, they just do a lot of heavy lifting, having to remember stuff, still leaving you space to make your own deductions. But like if I'm forgetting something, it's nice to have basically a compendium of the whole game ready. But I just think they're also cool style choices. A game that came out towards the end of last year, I think called Scrabdackle, had a very wonderful notebook where like hand drawn drawings from like the character's perspective, while also actually fleshing out the information of the world that was like easier to follow because it was a lot going on after a while. So a very cool choice to want to stick to the analog. And like you said, is that because not just to help with the players, but also that's a part of like the detective aesthetic in your opinion? Like it has to be a bit of an analog element to that.
In a way, in a way. I mean, there's some detective games that also make it work with a very digital world, like Lacuna. I really enjoy that. That all is all sorted. It's also keeping track of stuff for you in a very digital way, but without taking away from that noir aesthetic. You still feel like this, you know, gloomy detective in a trench coat smoking. You know, somehow those that it feels naturally more analog. But I think there's a lot of different ways you could do this. But yeah, for me, it was really I want you as a player to experience the fantasy of being a detective the way you would when you're in a detective novel, right? So where just like you're following on all the twists and turns, and because you're right there, it feels like you are solving the crime as you're with that person, uncovering the twists and turns of the story without it being the real challenge. Because if we really were tasked with being actually putting the information together, it would probably be extremely hard and you would feel stupid. And I don't want my players to feel stupid. So yeah, I just want them to have the fantasy more than the realistic detective challenge.
Understood. Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for answering that. Let's talk a little bit more about Detective Turner. And specifically, one of the more unique things about the game is you are quite literally reading a room in this game. So there's still like the usual trappings of the murder mystery part of like talking to suspects, interrogating your evidence, photographing evidence. But talk about this reading the room part a little bit. Where did that idea come from?
Right. Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, in 2021, I got into this. I want to make games with Twine, and I want to do just for in case somebody doesn't know what Twine is, it's an HTML-based storytelling engine, and classically, you just click on links to make choices. So that maybe there's 2 or 3 links, and you decide what you're going to be doing. And I just like to do anything but that. I'm basically be like, what other mechanics can we do? I made Snake in Twine. This is just makes no sense, but you can do it. I made a game about washing your hands that is entirely graphics based, where there are 0 words and nothing really to click on.
Okay.
And then one of the games I made was about me moving from Copenhagen to Berlin before I moved to South Africa. And there I tried to do the opposite challenge where I'm like, I've done all but text based things. I want to get back to doing things made of text, but it's still graphics made out of text. It will make sense when you take a look at the game. It's called Transit, but it's basically yeah, like a train made out of the words train, 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 and then the
Oh,
doors. That's why I say
okay.
spell doors, and then they open and close, and you got to still click on words, but sometimes it's also like a typing mechanic. You're texting with my sister, and so you're just mashing the keyboard, but it's making nice little text that of our actual interactions. And I just realized I have this thing for text, and I kind of want to get deeper into it. And I like really feeling like you're in the novel, you know, like you're reading a book, but you're being sucked into this space, and then you really have to push your cursor over the text and be like, there's evidence here. Let me dive deeper into that world. Yeah, so
Right.
I'm obsessed with text, as you can see.
No, understandable. This actually has me curious. Do you read, I mean, outside even like your game development stuff, are you reading a lot of detective novels or murder mysteries? Is that something that you've always done? And like that's where that love for immersing people in the literal reading process comes from?
No, I have to admit, I don't really read that much anymore. I think as a child, I was super obsessed to the point where I couldn't sleep unless I read a chapter of something. And I'm not sure at what point in my life that changed, but yeah, no, reading not that much. But I do love the mysteries on TV. I like the Knives Out series, and what's it called? The one in the White House. Do you remember?
Oh yes, the one that came out on Netflix, I believe.
Yeah,
Yes, I did.
exactly.
I watched that one recently too. Oh, I wish I
Like
could
the
remember it.
mansion or something. I'm not sure what it was
Yeah.
called, but yeah, that one was fantastic. Also because you have the trope of the classic detective, but it's a black woman who loves birds, and you're just like, yes, why not? And I think also the basically autistic trope of detectives that you're like, we are just weirdo heroes in a beautiful way, right?
Hmm.
And anyone can be this smart person. So that has weird hobbies and habits and has their weird way of getting to the truth. Somehow they get there. It's yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that actually makes me do like a larger question, because I really like that show as well. I love just not only those personality traits she had of being like very straightforward with people, having this very strong interest that's almost is equally important to her as the actual investigation at the White House. And so many detective characters throughout murder mysteries have quirks like that. Is that just something that always has to come along with detective that brings people back to the genre? What do you think it is that's appealing about detectives that makes people have so many different iterations of them like this, but all still
Yeah.
being able to solve mysteries, murder or otherwise?
Yeah, I think you're definitely onto something there. I think it definitely has to do with this is a character who doesn't seem necessarily socially popular, or they're not necessarily the most beautiful or interesting person in the room. They're silent observers, so maybe it's also like a little bit um, to introvert crowd who are like, I'm here and I'm an integral part of the story, but I am just a little fly on the wall, and understanding the dynamics of this other crazy world where there's all this intrigue and mischief, or like there's all these layers to uncover between the social elements, but all this the cast of characters. Yeah, and I think it's interesting to be able to insert yourself into any random world. You know, if this is not billionaires or this is the cast of The Devil Wears Prada, like it is in similar to the world of The Devil Wears Prada as it is in The Flux Could Kill. It's just nice to just like hop into a new universe and kind of be observer of what makes y'all tick.
Right. Yeah, great, great. And now that you mentioned the Devil's Wear Prada, that actually leads to another question that I had about the setting for this world. You said in the marketing for this game, it's a mix of the Knives Out ensemble, which you've already mentioned, but as well as the Devil Wears Prada. That second part I'm really interested in. Where does the fashion world element come into this game? How much are you exploring it, or is it like are you just borrowing characters that you know you'll often run into in the fashion world, or is there something about the fashion world you're like, oh, this is the reason I have to make like a murder mystery about this?
Mm. So I started writing this initially in the classic thing of the senator and the mansion. And
Okay.
as I was in the like I had kind of constructed the murder and like a bunch of the characters, and then I realized like I don't need to make the murder victim a white man. Like I actually have creative choice to make this a whole cast of anyone, and I wanted to also make sure that the characters were queer and interesting and dramatic and flamboyant. And I was like, the fashion world is the right place to set this, and we can have a powerful woman in charge. And like especially like an inspiration like Miranda Priestley from The Devil Wears Prada. You're like, no one is more like loved and hate and powerful, and like you just the combination of like this is the perfect murder victim. And why not, like it doesn't have to be this old powerful man, it can just be this woman. And I think that like the scene itself already lends itself to a lot more of these dynamics of this intrigue of this. There's always a tragic model somewhere that's being dragged along, or that it's being told that they have this grand future for them, but they're actually just pawns. Or like there's all
Right.
these, who is the bestie of the of Miranda Priestley character Margot Voss in my game, like who is pulling the strings behind the scenes, and where's the power here, because we're all acting like we're friends and like we're supporting each other, like you're bringing new designers to the scene and supporting them, but really, are you controlling them? Like are they really free, or do they have to act grateful because that's what's socially acceptable? So I think there's like amazing archetypes of characters, tragic characters, dramatic people, and just especially just a world where that's very easily queer, which I think is just we need to see more of that.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with that more. And this is actually bringing me to another question that's a little bit similar to what we talked about before, but I want to put it in a different way. You were mentioning how you were starting with the one was starting with the manor, starting with this specific type of murder victim, but then you realized you could like do what you want. This is your game. Kind of in that line of thought, is there a lot of pressure when you're making a game that has like such a history within its own genre to follow certain genre tropes? How much are you aware of yourself being like, oh, I want to break out of the mold this way, but I still want to follow these things? And like, what kind of considerations are you making with the latter?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you want to be in a interesting combination of people will know what this is. You want people to see a screenshot and be like, I got an idea that this is detective. That's why you want to have some detective tropes, like a cigarette or something like that, or like a trench coat, as they often do. And so that just that when as soon as people see any bit of the game, they're like, I know what this is. But then with the twist, which for me is that it's a text-driven game that you yeah, engage with the world. It's kind of point and click, but it's 3D. You can't really say what perspective it is or what genre it is, other than it's noir and detective. But like this text thing is new, but it's set in a familiar environment, so that I don't think I'm shocking the player too much with too many new things. And yeah, so I see also like there's so many of these other detective games out there. There's so many visual themes. There's so many types of characters. There's so many different universes that can be set, and it's kind of incredible how far you can go, and you never feel like you're repeating the story, right? You're not
Right.
like we've experienced that kind of game before. You're like, no, they're all very unique. So yeah, I'm hoping I found the right balance.
Nice. I know we're starting to reach a little bit of time, so thank you for making the time again today. One last question or line of thinking I want to talk about was what's one detective story or murder mystery that you always suggest to anyone, whether that be film, TV, a game, or books, just one story you come back to as like, oh, if you're getting into this genre, this is a great place to start.
Mm. See, now this is one of the questions I should have prepared for. Um, it's not exactly the classic murder mystery that you would think of, but I think one of my biggest inspirations would be What Remains of Edith Finch. Um,
Oh,
it
excellent.
is a murder mystery of, I mean, like it's not murder, but it's a death mystery of sorts, right? Where it also seems like how, like you just have to figure out how could this possibly happen. I love this game because it's so story focused. The mechanics come completely secondary, but they're still so intuitive, even though they keep changing all the time. You never notice it changing. You're just like, let me die again. And
Right.
yeah, it's a lesson in game design and narrative game design for anyone.
Yeah, and it's that I love that choice. Not only because it is a great story, it's one of those first things that come to mind too when I think about like not even necessarily murder mysteries like you said in the usual way, detective, but just like oh, here is a mystery in which my entire propulsion in the game is trying to figure out how does this keep happening, what is going on, and so just one last question that brings into is when it comes to detective games for you, where do you think the fun in making a detective story a game comes from? Is it the ability to craft a story with these, like you said, Edith Finch like ways to dive in with mechanics and dive out because the story is the more important part? Or is there like a lot more fun had, at least for you, with building a deduction system for players to play around with?
Ooh, yeah. I think for me, the deduction system is really interesting because I like to challenge myself, as I've said before. And a lot of games that are narrative focused will have dialogue choices as the main way of like choosing one between. And of course, I have those as well. But I wanted to make sure that it feels more like you make bigger choices. So that's why one of your choices is to take a Polaroid or not to take a Polaroid, or decide to ask somebody about a particular piece of evidence or not, and follow up questions around that. So you're not just like clicking next through the story. You are more in charge of what exactly you consider worth investigating and or detecting, if something might be a red herring, or something that just is a clue that is not really a clue. So yeah, to me, challenging that is interesting, but also I think to just write these different voices for these characters, because you have to have so many different people who will have to present what they know or don't know, or hide the stuff that they have in their own voice. And everybody is so special and unique, and you get to just really explore these voices. Yeah, I enjoy that a lot.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for making time today, Riker. Please, where can people find you and be able to follow the development and the eventual launch of Detective Turner?
You can check out my itch page, riker.itch.io. There also is our all day all night page, and I think that's also all day all night at itch.io. There will be a Steam page, so once if you just look for Detective Turner, if looks could kill on Steam. And I cannot remember our Instagram handle, but I'll send a link so you can put it as a caption.
Awesome. That works
Something.
perfectly fine. Well, thanks again, Riker. Really appreciate the time and best of luck with Detective Turner.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
And that was Riker, one half of the duo behind the studio All Day All Night and their debut title Detective Turner and Flux Could Kill. I'm interviewing two developers instead of one for this next interview. I chatted with Nate Tamblyn and Thomas Pereira about their game Shelflife Art School Detective, where instead of trying to figure out who's dropping bodies, you're trying to figure out who's murdering art. We chat about their transition from making music videos to making video games, the art direction in a game that has so many different art styles all the time, exploring queerness in video games, and more. So, without further ado, here's the interview. First of all, Nate and Thomas, thank you for joining me today to talk about Shelflife Art School Detective. I would love for you, before we get into talking about the game, to talk a little bit about how you two got into game development. Because from my understanding, you actually started collaborating from music videos first, and then it led your way into game development. So how did that happen?
Yeah, we both went to the same art school, but we didn't actually know each other at art school, and we met through mutual friends afterwards. And one of those mutual friends is a musician who actually does the soundtrack for our game now, and they didn't have budget to like do proper music videos, and we were like, let's just do some at home. Let's tape a Furby to a remote control car. Let's let's make some like weird animations, and yeah, we just really liked working together. So yeah.
Nice, amazing. And the artist in question is called Pickle. What was the last part? I think it was Pickle.
Pickle Darling.
Pick and Darling, right? First of all,
Pickle
great
Darling, yeah.
name. Yeah, and I'm curious, has working on music videos informed the way you've worked on game development as well? Just like working certain creative muscles? Has there been like a weird transferable skill in that department?
I think we've sort of talked about this a little bit before, but I think we really like story and narrative and stuff. So I think even in the music video work that we were doing, like obviously it was quite visually sort of aesthetics driven, but I think we were always thinking about story, even in those like little kind of pockets, I guess, of a 3 minute long song or whatever. So I feel like knowing that we were both kind of into storytelling, and Nate had previously made a webcomic as well, the kind of like converging path for us, I think, was that we wanted to like do something with a story, and then it was kind of like, okay, what's the medium? And we found out that there was like a small bit of funding that you could get for kind of like narrative focused or story focused games in New Zealand. And so we were like, okay, we've done these music videos, no budget, kind of chilling. Here's it seemed like a long shot at the time, and we were like, oh, there's no way we're gonna like get a smidge of funding to like make a prototype. But we sort of put together a little proposal for something to send to the New Zealand Film Commission, and that kind of like their, I guess, support or validation, 6 or 7 years ago, that ended up being kind of like what started us on the journey. But yeah, it was a little bit of a shot in the dark. Like we were kind of like, maybe we could do this. We never really made anything interactive before. We both really like games, but obviously we'd come from art school. I was a graphic designer like major, and Nate was sculpture. So it wasn't like we weren't like fresh out of game dev school or anything. We were like, oh no, now we've got to figure out how to do this.
No, it's some of the best games ever have come from people that have not touched a lick of game development school. So we're glad to see you guys give it a try, which brings us to Shelflife. Let's actually get to talking about the game. So just so people understand, the reason that this has been so interesting to me, especially like the murder mystery games that have been coming out, is with this game, it's not corpses of humans that we're seeing. It's actually artwork that we're seeing get killed. So I'd love for y'all to talk about A, where the idea for that came from, and B, what does it mean to kill artwork in your opinion?
It sort of came to our mind because originally the game was more of like a sort of weird art school depression simulator walking sim, and that was sort of informed by our times at art school, and it was kind of it was a bit too depressing, and we weren't having fun making it. It was less cathartic than we thought it would be.
Okay.
So then when we pivoted and we thought, okay, well, what do we like about this? What do we want to do? We're like, okay, murder mystery would be really fun, but we don't know if we want it to be like a human being murdered. But then for art students, having their work being destroyed is like the equivalent of a person being murdered. I mean, they put hundreds of thousands of hours into their pieces, so it would upset them in the same way. Thomas, do you want to?
Yeah, I think we were really interested in the idea of like I think this was sort of around the time that cozy games as well was starting to become kind of like really talked about in the zeitgeist, I guess, if you want to say that.
Okay.
And we weren't necessarily thinking like, okay, this needs to be cozier. Let's tone down all of this violence that we really wanted to include. I don't think we necessarily ever wanted it to be that way anyway. So it kind of felt like a good fit. We were like, okay, so what would a slightly cozier take on an art school crime, be? And I think, the destruction of somebody's art that they spent, all year making or even longer, I think a lot of the artists that we know, and I guess ourselves as well to some extent, you put so much of yourself into the thing that you're making, and it really feels like, oh, if I could just make this one thing, then my life will be complete. It's the best thing I've ever done. It's my baby. I love it.
Right.
I think that was kind of with the idea for like, okay, if the artworks are being killed, they'll be the victims, and I think that these kinds of characters are going to have strong emotional reactions to that. That's the equivalent of a death, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's such a good idea. I was just like, yeah, when you're thinking about the way artists put pretty much all of their self in their artwork, having that as a replacement for bodies is like one of those things I would not have thought of originally, but like kind of a perfect one-to-one almost, especially when thinking about the subject matter. And just like out of curiosity, from your own experiences going to art school, have you ever seen that kind of thing happen where someone's artwork just gets messed up and what the fallout that is? If you're comfortable talking about that, because I can see how that would be a pretty emotional thing in reality as well.
Well, one time, and I think it was in my third year at art school, I was really upset with a piece that I'd done because I was like, the critique was tomorrow, and I didn't want to deal with it, so I destroyed my own artwork, like completely put it in the bin, wrecked it, and then during the critique, I was like, look, I don't have anything to show because I put it in the bin, and everyone just sort of started critiquing my attitude or the imagined thing of that the artwork could have been, and that was quite traumatic for me. But I don't know if anyone actually. I don't know if I've heard of anyone doing it to someone else's artworks. Definitely people in the past had things that they left out in the way and that cleaners put in the skip because, cleaners don't know what is art and what is trash, especially with like, I mean, in the sculpture space, there's a lot of like found object stuff where you might put like a piece of trash on a plinth or whatever. So sometimes it can be a bit blurry. I don't know, Thomas, have you ever had anything like that?
I mean, I think what's interesting, I guess, is like especially within the sort of confines of the art school space, it feels like anything that could possibly be art is quite sacred. So there is this feeling that like if you did mess with somebody's workstation or their project, that you're like really overstepping, you're committing some kind of like transgression, right?
Right.
It definitely didn't happen very often. Like I graduated a little bit before Nate, but I think what I did hear of was like, things going missing, getting misplaced, like never quite tracking down what happened. Like sort of, it was always a little bit like if something went awry, no one would ever admit to it. And there was, not really any process for investigating those kind of occurrences. One of our other game dev friends who knew some art school students was actually telling us while we were working on this game, they were like, someone at a different art school has had their artwork destroyed and there is a little investigation going into it. And I think that was sort of like a couple of weeks of us kind of parasocially like being interested in that because it was like, oh, this does happen sometimes. And can't remember what the conclusion of that was. I think it might have ended up being that they actually did destroy their own thing similar to Nate and then didn't want to admit it.
Okay.
So there was, I think there is a lot of like instances of artists being a little bit self-destructive with their own projects. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that is wild. I can't even imagine just like having to go through the mental hoops of just like having to lie about that for such a long period of time. Everyone has their own reasons for things, but that is interesting.
Emotions were high, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. But to continue talking about art, especially for this, I got a chance to play the demo, fortunately, because this interview was able to happen after your demo released to Steam. And I'm so taken with the different art styles that are occurring in this game. You guys have like 2D character artwork, you have pixel art going on, you have paper collage stuff. What was the art process like for making this game? How did you guys figure out how to blend together all these different styles and how much you wanted to like play around with them essentially?
I'll let Thomas start.
Oh
Start this
yeah.
piece.
Okay. Well, I guess I was kind of like early on. I feel like I was very controlling of our kind of like aesthetic, and I was very like I'm kind of a pixel artist. Like aesthetically is my preference, and I was like, okay, we're gonna make a pixel art game. It's an indie game, you know, that's fine, that's normal. You know, this was sort of for our first prototype, and I was kind of like, well, you know, we'll keep it all very pixel perfect and kind of retro looking, and it's fine. You know, it's an aesthetic that's kind of been established, right? But I think as time went on, I had to learn to like let go of it a little bit. We have other artists and collaborators who we wanted to work with. Our 2D character artist was kind of like the one who sort of like broke my pixel art wall down with the suggestion that we could have these like HD kind of cartoony sprites of the characters over top of all this sort of pixel art, you know, 2.5D stuff that I'd been doing. And I was like so resistant and, you know, throwing my toys. But as soon as we kind of did the mock-up for it, I had to kind of like admit that I really liked it. And that I think broke the seal on this mixed media thing. I was like, okay, so once we had these kind of like quite interesting pieces of 2D character art, you know, illustrated and drawn in, I was like, okay, well, like I think the bag's open now. We can get more experimental. We can be more playful. I think we were quite interested in when Inscription came out and we played that. It felt very playful and interesting with the different mediums that were in that. We've talked about it before too, but we really like Hylix. Aesthetically very interesting, like a bit of claymation, and it also felt like permission for us to put a bit more of ourselves back into the game as kind of like art school graduates and as people who've got these, you know, we've been living in flats for, you know, the last 10 years or whatever, and dragging around our like bodies of work from art school and before. So we do have a lot of like sculptures and things from Nate that we were able to like scan in and put it in the game. And it was really exciting to do that. We were like, okay, permission to use like our old kind of weird art. I mean, I put this like next to my desk actually in case this came up, but like I have all these folders of like old anime drawings that I from when I was like 12. This I think was like the first piece of digital art I ever made. It's not great, and don't ask me who these characters are or what their deal is. I must have been watching Naruto. Good. I think these are like Naruto OCs would be my guess. But we just have heaps of old art, and so that it was a cool excuse for us to get weird with it. I don't know. Is that a good answer, Nate?
Yes.
No, that's a great answer. And like I can already feel that from the way this game started. Like this game, like the demo in itself already starts with people talking about our archival memories of like looking at the pronouncing the name character's name correct me if I'm wrong, but is it Joanna?
It's technically Johanna, but like
Johanna. Okay, there we go.
People can pronounce it however they want. Okay. We don't mind.
All right. So for Johanna going into their artisanal memory and like using that as a base, I'm curious for your own artistic processes, either for the game or even individually. How often do you guys find yourself even going back to your old work, either for inspiration or being like, oh, I used to do this, I want to keep doing something like this, or now I really want to do something different? Just how often do you find essentially yourself exploring your old selves?
I feel like it's like kind of like a 6-month cycle. Like every 6 months or so, we're like, okay, let's go back, let's have a look through the old archives. Just because we've been working on this project for so long now, I guess it's been 7 or 8 years. Even the early stuff from when we first started on the project feels so like it feels so strange to look back on it now. It feels like it's like our different selves from all that time ago made this stuff. So yeah, I feel like it's really good to go back and review. And also because there's lots of ideas that you forget that you had and you can bring them back in, especially if you like didn't keep them in the main folder of ideas.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I like how you phrase that so much. Yes, it's so important to us. I think I don't know that it was intentional, but that sort of like nostalgically reviewing our old content, whether it be from the several year long process of making this game and going through different prototypes, or the like returning to your own like childhood art and the kinds of things that, you know, we were making it pre-art school, high school art, university art. Like, I think maybe a lot of creative people can kind of relate to that journey of like, there's something really interesting and charming about revisiting stuff that you used to make. It does feel like you were a different person back then. What were you doing? Like, what media were you consuming and being influenced by? A lot of my characters are like super kind of like whatever anime I was watching at the time as a sort of teen/tween. There's a lot of that, but even like going back to, I have some drawings from when I was like maybe 4 or 5 years old, and I loved Transformers, like the sort of like robots in disguise Transformers, and nice. I have these sort of like ridiculous drawings and like kind of scribbly felt tip pen of those, and it's very charming. I think like very also cathartic maybe, and kind of healing and interesting to have an opportunity to take little pieces of that and find a way to kind of put them into this project. So it's like the mixed media component is kind of like goes across different mediums, but it also like kind of goes across time a little bit as well, which it makes it very cool and personal and weird, and it feels very healing somehow.
No, great way to put it. Both of you, thank you for answering that question. I love those answers. Now, that's just to pivot a little bit, still talking about Shelflife. You guys, for your studio, have a pretty explicit focus on creating queer experiences in video games. And so I'm curious, for Shelflife, how do you guys intend on exploring queerness in that game? And just in general, how do you often see your favorite examples of games exploring queerness, whether just in their stories, in their mechanics? How have you seen it across the game sphere that's either inspired you or just like, oh, that looks super cool?
I feel like because we've got a non-binary protagonist, and I feel like the first, and I mean, it's so rare that you actually have an explicit non-binary protagonist in a game, but I feel like the first time I ever saw it was, I guess, in Undertale, where it's kind of understated in a way, where the character is exclusively called they, them, and I think it's more expanded upon in Deltarune a little bit, but I always really liked that it wasn't a story explicitly about being non-binary, but it did have a non-binary protagonist, and I always wanted to do, like, for a story in a game, I always wanted to have a non-binary lead. I myself, I'm kind of, not to say kind of non-binary, because it's up to me to decide, but like being sort of like transmasculine, non-binary, I always wanted to, it's just nice to have a story that is about that, but not about coming out, and not about the trauma of it, but just about like slice of life, living your life, hanging out with other queer people. That's just what I want to see in media. And if someone says that there's any like gay or queer stuff in a TV show or a book or whatever, or a game, that always draws me in. So I just, I wanted to do that.
Yeah, I guess like samesies. I think like it's really nice to be able to have a cast of characters that are like queer in different ways, and feel like, oh, these are like people we know in real life. Like, this is like our friend group. This is like people you could meet. I think that sort of incidentally queer kind of narrative is my favorite, where, again, like Nate said, it's not just about coming out stories. Not that they're bad. I think there's room for all kinds. Like, I'm excited by other queer games that are like super dark and like really, really focused on the trauma of queerness too. But I think there's room for like silly and absurd and kind of interesting explorations of it as well. I think for us, being able to do like a little bit of both is probably where we want to sit. Like, I think with the relationship building kind of stuff that will happen in our game, we imagine, as the players get kind of closer to some of the characters, they'll get to see past some of their like facades, or kind of like get a little bit deeper into some of their traumas if they have them, or some of their fears or insecurities and things like that. So I think even though there is like a silliness to the past, we kind of do want it to have some heart too. So that, I think that's kind of like, in terms of stuff that we've been inspired by, I guess Undertale does that really well, like you were saying. I think there's some, something to be said for like Heartstopper, I think isn't too bad. It definitely has some of the coming out and some of those cliches, but I feel like in the wider cast, there's also like a a range of queer experiences with the kind of like greater pool of characters in that show. I found myself like more interested in the side characters than like the main two. Not they're fine as well, but like yeah, and having read the graphic novels as well. But yeah, I feel like that's sort of where we're at with it. I think we want it to be silly but with a bit of heart and kind of just reflective of our own experiences and our own friend groups. Yeah.
Right. And I'm really glad you're both for talking about the range of the queer experience too that you guys want to explore with this game. Because I feel like, as you said, there's nothing wrong with coming out stories or anything like that, but that definitely feels like the predominant narrative you see so often when queer stories either get made or start breaking into the mainstream. And so I'm curious, even from your perspective, making a game that you like know or ideally wants to have some commercial success, do you guys ever find yourself having some sort of pressure in like either shortening experience or not going fully into it when you're trying to think about the audience? How often do you find yourself thinking to yourself, oh, who are we making this for? Do you want to make it like still palatable so people have like an onboarding ramp? Or it's just like, hey, if you're queer, you'll get this, and if you don't, too bad. Like, where do you guys usually fall on that line when making stuff?
Maybe Thomas, you start this and I'll think.
Yeah, you want to chew on that. I mean, it's a great question. Like, I think because like I was saying before, we originally the whole kind of prototype for the project came along with us applying for funding from the New Zealand Film Commission, and sort of like even from the get-go, we were really kind of confident that it was going to be a game with a very LGBTQI plus cast, right? So it was kind of like a foundational thing that is, I guess, something that we've never seen as an option to compromise on. And then kind of like sort of snowballing out of that, we have received some support from the New Zealand Centre of Digital Excellence, so NZ Code, and I think they saw the potential in what we were doing, like as in like, you know, there is an audience for this, and that I think gave us the confidence, I suppose, to like, as we, you know, kept working on it and kind of like we'd sort of put it aside a little bit and then we were coming back to it, feel like, yes, we don't need to be compromising. Yes, we can be sure that like, let's just make it kind of how we want. We don't need to kind of censor or change things. There are enough, you know, people out there who understand these experiences, and enough like open-minded people and allies who will enjoy it too, that it doesn't need to be a case of like, you know, hey, you better change, you know, this and this and this and this if you actually expect to even, you know, sell the game and support your studio and like be able to continue to make things. So I think, yes, getting some support from a kind of like from mentors and from this sort of like external organization who saw some, it sounds weird, but like saw some commercial potential in what we were doing. I think it helped us, not that we ever were going to like pivot away from this part of the project, but I think that helped us feel confident about going into situations unapologetically, instead of being like, you know, oh, don't look, you know, like so yeah, you jump in.
Oh, just to build on that, before we started like posting on like TikTok and social media, we had been like, because people always talk about how like if you tag anything as LGBT or queer, like you get shadow banned or your stuff gets hidden, and that was also something that we really were a little bit worried about. But then when we were just doing it, that's not the case at all. It's like unfounded fears, and tagging it that way helps you find the audience that does exist and is hungry for this stuff. So I think just like getting out there and like showing people what we've done has just given us like so much more confidence to show that like there is an audience. We don't need to compromise. We can be confident in our decisions and yeah.
Amazing. Awesome. That's great to hear. I'm glad that they were able to work with people who let you guys be uncompromising in that message as well. That's always comforting to hear, especially with queer experiences and like, especially today's day and age. Like right now I'm based in the United States, and as we all know, the LGBTQ plus community out here has been essentially under attack under our current administration, which has been awful. So I'm always an advocate for any chances that we get to be unapologetic in just who we are, narratives, and just all of that. So it's wonderful to hear. Now we're getting a little bit close to time, so thank you guys for being on here again. I just want to ask you one last question that I've been asking everyone that was able to interview for this feature that we're doing. If you could suggest to the audience watching this any single murder mystery or detective story, whether it be from movies, TV, films, or another game besides yours, what's one that you would love for them to check out or engage with?
I want to shout out the It's a UK series, Jonathan Creek, with Alan Davies. There's not that many episodes, but it went on for a long period of time. I just really like it. It's a lot of like locked room mysteries. The main character is like a magician's assistant, so he's like knows how to like unpack a mystery. I just always find those really interesting, and I love the characters in that. So I would recommend Jonathan Creek.
Awesome.
Yeah, I guess for my part, I'll say like Tangle Tower, I think is really cool, and they're in the show. That team is in the showcase with us with the Mermaid's Mask, right? That's the
sequel
new
to that.
the sequel
Yeah.
to that. I think please check that out. I guess I quite enjoyed a kind of a very different sort of mystery experience was Paradise Killer. I think was a really interesting kind of take on the genre that was fun. Yeah, I feel like those are up there for me.
Awesome.
Oberdin. So
Okay,
good.
definitely. We'll have to check those out. And funnily enough, I played Paradise Killer for the first time toward the end of 2025, going to January. Definitely a great game. I recommend people check out. So that's very fun for it to come up here again. Well, thank you, Nate and Thomas, for joining me. Where can people find you?
We're at Knife Games on most things: TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. We're on Blue Sky. We also have a Twitter account that we don't really use, but yeah, just find us wherever. Or just search our game Shelflife Art School Detective on Google and it should come up.
Amazing. Well, thanks again for joining me today, guys, and best of luck with the development of Shelflife and just the rest of game development.
Thanks.
Yay, thank you so much.
And once again, that was Nate Tamblin and Thomas Barrera from Knife Games talking about their upcoming game, Shelflife Art School Detective. Also note that, as I mentioned in the interview, Shelflife Art School Detective actually is a demo that's available on Steam right now. It took me about an hour, maybe some change to finish it. I think it does a pretty good job of setting expectations for what kind of humor and characters to expect, while also showing off the different kind of art styles. So if this interview piqued your interest, or just the look of the game piqued your interest, I recommend going to check that out. Now it's time for the last interview with the creator behind Duppy Detective Tashia, Glen Henry. Now, Duppy Detective Tashia, a Caribbean point-and-click game where you, as Tasha, go into the halfway market trying to solve the murder of a Duppy while looking for your phone, might sound familiar to you if you've been following me for at least the last month or so, because I recently interviewed the award-winning composer behind Duppy Detective Tashia, Chase Badia. Consider checking that interview out if you end up liking this one, or if you've already checked out Duppy Detective Tashia and you want to go figure out how they came up with the Caribbean noir genre for it. Now, as our interview with Glenn, we chatted about bringing Caribbean culture to video games, his own experience with Caribbean folklore storytelling, the role that senses, sights, hearing, taste, all that, play in detective stories, and more. Because there's always more if you haven't figured that out yet. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the last interview. First things first, Glenn, thanks for joining me tonight. Really appreciate you making the time to talk about Duppy Detective Tashia. First, before we get into the actual game, I want to talk to you just a little bit about your journey as a game developer. You've been making games at Sprite Wrench since 2014, is that correct?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I've kind of just been saying 10 plus years because I don't know exactly when the time started exactly like the exact moment, but yeah.
Nice. What got you into game development in the first place, and how did you end up getting the idea for Duppy Detective Tasha after having was the most recent game you done Sunken Stones?
Yes.
Yeah, so that you go from puzzle strategy game to roguelike puzzle strategy game to visual novel detective story. So we'd love to hear about just how all that came to be.
Okay. Well, it's kind of funny because technically, Tashia was announced first in 2022.
Oh,
And I then paused development because we had applied for a business development grant to try and access a bit more capital. I am still in the process of trying to, you know, build up a habit of releasing multiple games across a year. Part of that is one for my own creative output, and two to try and figure out what a path to a sustainable indie business looks like for my context. So I paused DDT, and then went to work on Sunken Stones, thinking that that would have been a small project. And the idea is that there would always be a big project and a small project. Um, the grant program took a little bit longer to mature than anticipated, and then Sunken Stones itself took a bit longer than anticipated to finish. So
right.
that's why the releases have been structured as they are. Yeah.
That makes sense. And actually, I noticed something when I'm like been looking through your sites and everything that making smaller games is a bit of a focus for your one man studio generally. Is there a reason you prefer focusing on smaller games and just trying to have a more constricted scope?
Um, so part of it is like if I keep it small, I know I can finish it. I am There's normally like this constant push to continue the games
Right.
and continue. There's always a reason to delay. Um, there's always more time to polish. There's always something extra. But over my career, I found that there is a strength in shipping. There's a strength in finishing projects. It may not necessarily be polished. It may not necessarily be final, but putting it out there, getting that feedback, getting that response, uh, that is something I want to continue doing. It's pretty much the payoff for all the stress of working on the project, and that is kind of how I see the career going forward. The way to make this sustainable is rather than taking like a huge multi-year bet, it's a lot of smaller bets, and
Right.
the more you ship, the more you gain that knowledge to make those smaller bets, make those smaller projects. It's like a skill, it's a muscle, and you're developing it over time.
Yeah, I've heard about that quite often from people talking about how finishing in of itself is a skill that you really have to get used to, because it really is. Or you can tell me if that you feel the same. That last 10% feels like a whole other 90% within itself, right? Yeah, I've heard that before. So very cool to see that you have that focus on like making sure that muscle's especially refined. Which brings us to the latest game that you're finishing, Duppy Detective Tasha. Now, the thing that was really interesting about this game from the get go was the way that you've been meshing together Caribbean folklore and the detective genre. So right off the bat, I wanted to ask you, what was the inspiration about bringing those two things together? Was it just as straightforward as you like having this Caribbean folklore you're interested in, wanting to bring it to a genre that you enjoy, want to play around with, or was there something that you want to explore from bringing those two things together?
So the story for DDT really came from me trying to brainstorm ideas of what my next project would have been, um, and part of that kind of there's a weird spot where I'm trying to figure out like what is the game that only I can make, right? That is like my skills, what I have. I'm a self-taught artist. I have learned how to build games in a very particular way. My background, I'm based in the Caribbean. Um, uh, who I have access to in terms of collaborators, that type of stuff. And I started thinking or brainstorming an idea around like a collection of like modern folk tales, kind of like R.L. Stein, but make it Caribbean kind of thing.
I love that.
And one of there's like a whole collection of them and kind of pull them together. And one of them was an unfortunate, pretty common experience is like, you're walking in town and somebody probably steals your phone, like holds you up and you have an altercation like that. And the idea was like to take that premise and like spins a bit. It's like, oh, they didn't just steal your phone, they stole your shadow. And that has all manner of implications there. Um, and that was one story. There are a couple other ones. There were like retellings of like exploring like the story of like Annie Palmer, the White Witch of Rose Hall, Annie Palmer, um, and I figured like let me see if I can zero in on one and flesh that out more and more and more. So Duppy Detective came from that stealing storyline, and then I was also wrapping up like Spirit Detective Yu Yu Hakusho with my partner, my wife. And
Amazing.
like, why not? Let's like why not Duppy Detective? What does that look like? How would Tashia come about? And kind of adopted a bunch of personality or from Yusuke, who's a protagonist from the show, and kind of just grew from there. Right?
Nice. And this is also everyone who's listening signed to go watch a Yu Yu Hakusho if you can. It is a great anime. I watched it for the first time like 2 years ago, and it is immediately shot up to one of my favorite animes. Just real class act there. But yeah, so talking a little bit more about this actually for the Caribbean folklore. The reason I wanted to keep talking to you about this is because, as you know, I recently interviewed the composer for Duppy Detective Tasha Chase Bethia as well. And once we started talking a little bit about Caribbean folklore, I saw genuine fear enter this man's eyes as he was just thinking about the extremeness that these stories can go to sometimes, or just the fear with the cautionary tales in this. So I wanted to get your take on this as well. What's been your experience listening to these stories as you've been growing up, as you've been engaging with them with your family, or if there's other places that you've heard about them? And in addition to that, what has it been like translating those stories that have like so many different parts into a games as a medium?
So, so it's interesting. So I've always had like this love of folklore, just like in general, like picking up different myths and legends from different places. Like you hear the stories about the mountains of Appalachia, you hear, you know, all the yokai from Japan, and you hear the devas and asuras from India. Um, then we have our own local stories, but it's like very mismatched, niche all over the place. So like you have stories about like the green lizard jumps on you and then reaches water before you, like something bad will happen, or stuff like that. And a lot of it is just like part of the language, part of everyday life. And then some of it is like very particular stories. Now, for me, like all of this would have been like just part of the culture. There wouldn't have been like any load bearing touch point to say like, hey, this is what got me interested. This is where what I want to build on. But I realized like if you really want to like dive very deep into any one of these channels, like there's not a lot of like written tradition around this. A lot of it is oral. A lot of it is going to be passed down from rural Jamaica into town. And because of my own upbringing, where I am upper to middle class, there are a bunch of socioeconomic and political things tied to that. I would not have like direct experience with all of that. So like looking into that, engaging with that was like experiment in terms of figuring out like my connection to it and figuring out these stories and learning more about it in a way to try and make myself feel, for lack of a better word, like authentically Jamaican. Like I wanted to feel that. And to this day, there might be parts of stories that I might have adapted um, uh, incorrectly, or I didn't dive too deeply in. And in the game itself, it's kind of it's not super deep into the folklore. Like there's not like, because there's a lot of room for interpretation with these things. But I still wanted them represented in a way. And as I was working on it, one of the things that I thought was pretty interesting is that there was this conversation of like, a lot of these stories, a lot of these traditions are dying out. They're not necessarily making the jump from the previous generation or the generation before that to the current one. And there are a lot of factors for that. Lack of interest, again, going back to the lack of written resources, and just a lack of push for these things. But if you look, you see that there are these champions, these scenes, these spaces that are taking time to kind of reinvent and retell and push these things forward. And after a fashion, Duppy Detective kind of became like my attempt to do that. I don't know if I did it well. It could be completely off base, but it's an attempt. I think it's important to try, and I'm open to have that conversation with people. Like, it's like, oh, rolling calf don't go so. You don't even have the conversation about like counting rice grains and all. Okay, that's fine. Let's have that conversation. Let's have that dialogue. I want people to challenge me. I want people to resonate with the part that resonates with them. But I think it's still important to attempt it. So, yeah.
Right. No, that makes great sense there. It's like you now have not necessarily started, but have now hit another chapter of continuing the tradition of telling these stories. And like you said, without the written resources to do so, you are having to figure out a lot of what does make it to the screen for people who will be engaging with this for the first time, like I did for the first time. Which also makes me curious, how much play testing did you go into this game? Did you show this to a lot of people? Did you show this to your spouse a lot, and like getting their feedback on what kind of folklore should be included in this?
So that question is kind of like broad, because like I would have had ongoing dialogue with my partner, going through and like asking for feedback, what do you think about this? Does this sound authentic? Does this sound cringe? Does this sound good? I've been talking to my other friends and asking for their input. It's like, is this off base? Is the tone too much for this? And then I would have done playtests for myself as well as playtests with a couple other small group of friends, um, and kind of like just getting responses and trying to pull things together. I think one of the major points of feedback actually was just like the demo itself, because you would have spent a lot of time during the prototyping phase, kind of going back and forth on the core systems for the game, the designs, things of that nature. Like we landed on the art direction pretty early. Like that was just unanimous. Ariana Lynn, who's our character artist, um, phenomenal job. Like all the designs knocked straight out of the park. And the work with Listen Me Studio, who's an animation team who did the cinematic animation, they did like a lot of the concepting stuff very early on. So we had like this rich tapestry to kind of pull things together, but like we couldn't land on core like mystery mechanics.
Okay.
So after deliberating for a long period of time, and then like funding was not necessarily working out, we kind of said, okay, have to bring this into a smaller iteration. Um, Folded back into my solo-ish operation, pulled together what I could, and figured, okay, this would be, does this look interesting? So I asked a small group. They said, yeah, this works. I'm like, okay. And I push out the demo, and then other people picked it up, and they were like, it resonated with them, and they were interested. I'm like, okay, cool. I can continue this. I can build on this. I can work on this. And that is that's the approach that I've kind of taken with this project, which is this collaborative, this validating process, and I guess hope to kind of that this story um, can reach people. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you for answering that. And so, something else that I wanted to ask, just one last thing for Deputy Detective Tash in particular, is when I first played a demo, something that immediately stood out to me in when you were just talking about mechanics was the five senses system that you have in there. For those, I'll put up a video on screen so you can see it, but it involves you picking up the physical clues in Deputy Detective Tasha and using your sight, your taste, your just visual eyes to just get these descriptions of the clues and then make some analysis based off of that. And I would love to learn more about how that part came to be as well, and as well as just like what do you think is the role of senses in doing detective work generally? Because when I saw this and thought back to it, I realized that a lot of games, while they have their way of like drip feeding you clues and like leading you to ways, there's not actually a lot of sensory dialogue that's happening in games when it comes to the way they engage with clues. So it was something that was a novel that stood out to me about Duppy Detective Tasha.
So that's funny, because that was the solution to that those mystery, the hangups around mystery mechanics that we were we had early on during the prototyping phase. So for a lot of the reference games that I would have played and we would have looked at, you find that detective systems or deduction systems kind of always fall into mini games at a certain point. So like you have the narrative layer of something interesting is happening, but in order to move forward and progress, you have to do this weird mini game. So like Danganronpa, I played that and I loved the initial mystery and going to this place and finding this item and talking to this person and that eureka moment that pops into your head naturally over the course of that dialogue. But then it got interrupted with the truth bullet system, which I understand has to exist because most people are expecting a certain level of interactivity uh, with with games. They're expecting that you can have a win state and a lose state. One of the things I was trying to assert with the DDT is you can just have like deduction. You can have people kind of infer and make their own guesses and pull things along in that way, and it may result in probably a lighter mystery overall because since the systems themselves are really in service of a narrative versus like mystery mechanics deduction. I feel that it is enough for you to kind of engage with the story in a deeper way. It doesn't pull you out of it, right?
Right.
You're looking at the thing. It adds just enough friction to the story that you're not just clicking through, and I think that is powerful.
Nice. Thank you. I know we're starting to reach time, and thank you again for making time for me today. One last question I want to ask you is for even outside of Duppy Detective Tasha, what is one detective story or murder mystery that you suggest to anyone, whether that be from TV, film, a book even, or just another game? I'm curious, what's one that you're like, oh, if you're going to get into a good detective story, this is what you got to lock into?
Hmm. There is a game that I'm stepping through right now. Oh wait, no, it's an easy answer to this. I'm sorry, I was going too deep. Blueprints.
Great
I was going
answer.
too deep. Blueprints.
Blueprints.
Yeah, but ironically, that game did not hook me necessarily for the mystery aspect, though the narrative served that deeply. You're trying to figure out what's happening and all that. It was the mesh of the game systems and the premise, how it was set up very directly, and then completely like blew past whatever constraints you thought you had with it. So I like moments like that. I like the point where games allow the player to make these free will um, connections between things, and it doesn't necessarily explicitly hold your hand. Um, yeah.
Nice, great answer. Yeah, Blueprint is something that I keep telling myself I'm going to get to, but I just know that when I do, I'm not gonna want to touch anything else for like weeks. So I'm like purposely saving it for a time where like I know I'm gonna have a couple of days, if not to at least like really get into the start of it. That'll carry into me having a regular schedule again. So this is another reminder for me to go pick that up. But thank you again for joining me tonight, Glenn. Where can people find you?
All right. They can find me at Sprite Wrench on pretty much everywhere. I'm not really on Twitter, but the handle is there. But I'm mostly active on Blue Sky. You also can hit me up on Instagram, or you can head to my website and check out all the stuff I'm working on there, and that's spritewrench.com.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
All right.
And once again, that was Glen Henry, the founder of Sprite Wrench and the developer behind Duppy Detective Tasha, which I'll note out of all 3 games that you've seen today is the only one that is currently out. It came out on June 8th, so if you like this interview or you just liked anything you've seen about the game, I recommend playing the demo or just checking it out as it is. Now, this is far from all the murder mysteries that exist in the video game space. Hell, this is even all the murder mysteries that were at Fellow Traveler Storyridge Showcase. I didn't get a chance to talk to developers behind Grave Seasons or Apple Crumble or what the game mentioned in my interview with Nathan Thomas, Mermaid Mask. So there's quite a bit out there. But the point that I want to make is that this still makes for a great sample of how developers are continuing to bring unique stories, mechanics, and people to an old but still thriving genre. If you liked this video, please leave a like and consider subscribing to get more video game coverage like this. And don't be shy about sharing your own thoughts about the interviews in the comment section, or just sharing your favorite murder mystery detective stories so that people have recommendations to check out after this video. Never too many recommendations when it comes to, well, literally anything, but especially detective stories. Take care of yourself, take care of your loved ones. Thanks for watching. Ciao. Side note, I just need to read this little synopsis here because I love the way that they set this up. It's actually kind of hilarious. The criminal mind is a twisted place, and Jimmy Kudo knows the shadowy corridors of humanity better than any detective in the game. There ain't a bad guy in town who can outsmart him, so he tried to put the super sleuth down for a dirt nap. But instead of ending up in a shallow grave, Jimmy wakes up to find himself turned back into a kid. Utilizing his unlikely new persona and the latest in crime-fighting gadgetry, he tracks down his assailants as boy detective Conan Edogawa. I don't know why I put that voice on for that, but it just felt right.